I mean, there's this idea, right, with Housing First that these buildings are going to help people improve their quality of life and, essentially save taxpayers money and,
Yeah.
get the problems off the streets. Do you feel like first responders are called more to these buildings than, you say, your average apartment building?
Oh, I know they are. That's the whole basis of my approach is I'm just looking at hotspots. So I'm analyzing 911 data all the time on the criminal side. And again, I'm very embedded in both police and fire. We are acting as one public safety team. I'm in the police crisis data all the time. They have world-class research and analytics in that department, which complements and supplements what I have in 911. And I can see consistently that half of the top 10 hotspots, calls for service in 911, are going to these 5 locations. So then what do? I go spend time there and try to understand what's happening.
Thanks so much for coming and interviewing with me today. I usually ask people to introduce themselves and say where we're at.
I am Amy Smith. I'm acting chief of the Seattle Care Department, which is Seattle's 3rd public safety department. I have oversight of Seattle 911, which gets about 900,000 calls for service every year. And then I've set up the first pilot mental health team to be dispatched right from 911 to behavioral health calls.
Did you ever think that you were going to work for 911 in this capacity?
Nope. No, I didn't, but it is a fun application of a skill set that I already have. I've spent my career doing nonprofit work, always sort of pushing forward what we know, what is knowable about human behavior, what interventions might work, and then how much we really can't predict. I primarily was working in child welfare, school-based services, day treatment, juvenile justice, in those spaces where we know we can provide interventions, but it isn't correct to say, if this, then this. Then I redirect and somebody has a happy life. So I kept a foot in academia and eventually did a terminal degree that was really focused on learning science and cognition and behavioral research. And that's what you learn on day one. With human beings, there's never causation. That's not fair. And even correlation, it's if this and this in this context, then perhaps this. And so, in the political space, in the public sector, I'm trying to level set and say, if you're talking about housing or substance use disorder, reentry, all of these really complex human conditions, don't trust anyone who says categorically, this is the solution, or categorically, this is the causal factor. Don't trust that. That is never the case.
So what have you learned? You've talked about that. So, let's talk about a little bit more than just what you've learned. Talk to me about your education.
Yeah, so it was interesting. I come from a heavy construction family, from people who work and make things, and I grew up that way. I was really bookish, middle child in a big family, and I was inquisitive and curious and exposed to a lot of different religious ideologies. And I think what that promoted in my young mind was just, what are we all motivated by? And early on, I've still got my young journals. I always wrote a lot. And I thought, I think we're probably uncomfortable with death, and I think we're probably all looking for love and connection. And so as I was the first to go to college, and what I took from that is the people who need resources never know about them. I remember writing letters like, "Dear college, how do I get there?" I didn't know. And of course I would have had a guidance counselor or someone at that school, but I just, wasn't really aware. So I first studied in undergrad. I was just in love with the humanities, art, world religion, philosophy, ethics was my first favorite thing. And I think in part because, Aristotle, it frames something differently. What is truth? Like capital T truth, what is love, and strips out the dogma, right? Which I think often slows us down and divides us when you look at different world religions or different ideologies. And so I got married young. I had 4 kids in my 20s. I was always working, but I was working in arts nonprofits and, teaching music, things like that as a young mom, really wanting to prioritize parenting first and knowing, I'll be an empty nester when I'm 45 and then I'll probably, have some big career. I've always been a hard, intense worker. But what happened was I became an only parent. and suffered a number of blows and some significant loss later in my 20s, and realized, okay, I'm going to need to put 4 kids through college. I came up to Seattle in 2010 to go to grad school because I was already working in nonprofit administration. And I didn't want to make things up. I like to be able to cite chapter and verse, or, why I'm doing things the way I'm doing them. And so while I was up here, I got recruited to Amara, which seeks permanent homes for kids in foster care. And it was just the luckiest break of that season of my life, because I was in this, I was a little bit out of my depth. I didn't understand the foster care system, policy and legislation around that system. But I cared deeply. I care deeply about people generally. I had 4 kids and was able to get up close and see how kids actually come into care, which is often 2 a.m. after a drug raid. Siblings are split up. The state would be calling, who can take this kid? And then that's where the kid goes. So that's not going to be a best first placement. And there was a lot of new thinking around, okay, how do you take data science, regression? Why can Nordstrom track a customer all around, but I can't track a kid through the foster care system? So it's just a great time. Partners for Our Children at UW. I was at Amara. We were closely affiliated with Treehouse, Mockingbird Society, and everyone started to work together to figure out what is going on in this system and how can we make it better so kids don't just languish in it and move through anonymously, often from disruption to disruption to disruption. I was so happy doing that work. I was just abundantly curious about every piece of the problem. And from there, I, took bigger jobs. The career kind of took me back east. And then I was in the Midwest from 2015 until 2021, where I worked in primarily behavioral health services for kids. And I just stayed. I did an ethics degree. I did administration. I studied the psychology of giving. And then I wound up at Vanderbilt. And I was there finishing.
Vanderbilt in Tennessee, in Nashville? Okay.
Yeah. And just a fantastic experience. I think because school for me it wasn't even really part of any professional ambition. I was just always studying what I was most curious about on the side. And it was super fun. I had 4 teenagers and we'd all be studying together and, copy editing, and the kids say I source bomb. So whatever they were researching, I'd be like, oh, you need to source this and this and this, and it was just fun. It was a good time. But it also, by the end of it, I'm suddenly an empty nester. My kids have come back west, so I came to Seattle. I'm fresh from this totally different political environment, right? I was working in Ohio, Indiana, Kentucky, going to school in Tennessee during COVID, but in the wake of George Floyd. And it really was a different environment where I was aware of the need for reforms, aware of, the kind of the science around COVID. But because these states, especially Ohio, really is half red, half blue. And so there's a totally different level of respect and debate, I would say, that you never assume that everyone in the room agreed with you. And there's still higher religiosity, thriving Catholic community, Jewish community, Christian communities. And so when I came back to Seattle, those 6 years had changed me. And I had been very well trained at this point to not say a thing unless it was anchored in good evidence, a lot of evidence, and that everything is subjective, everything about human behavior. This is not, it's not empirical, it's not math. And so the best we can do if we're trying to help is to have some real humility. Who are you? What is it that you need? What has worked in the past? You start there. And then if here are different types of interventions or treatment that have worked for people in similar circumstances. So it was interesting to come back to Seattle. I was recruited by this mayor's office. And it was a little bit of a right turn for me, but I know data science. I saw 911 that way, like, oh, that'd be interesting to actually analyze what are the calls for service, who can I send? And then the pilot design, the idea that I could send mental health professionals to mental health calls for service, brilliant, right? Because I've been in this space. I have put kids in the back of a police car to be transported to a children's hospital because that was the process. That's ridiculous, right? No matter how skilled that officer is, that is problematic for a child in crisis. So I started about 13 months ago and just fell in love right away with the work, fascinated by the problems, and then fascinated by some of the narrative and community that does not at all reflect the reality that I'm in, right? Of law enforcement, of first response, of 911. So it's been very fun to sort of translate back and forth for different groups.
That is quite the shift to go from working in the area of children and then moving on to your education and then coming in and doing 911 stuff, and especially in the time of George Floyd. And so just with your multiple perspectives and knowing that the system needs reform, how much of an impact has your work had with changing how that has sort of played out in Seattle?
Yeah, I think what I did successfully looking back was I came in not understanding the political environment, not understanding, the first time I presented to the council, I didn't know people's ideologies or points of view or what they had said in 2020 and 21. I didn't know. I thought that my job was to represent, again, the reality statistically as well as I could. This is what is needed in community with regard to public safety provision. And this is my proposed use of this money that's been set aside for this pilot. So I could look at the crisis data. I went to police right away. I recognize police have been going to these calls. They probably understand best where they should not be going, where they're not useful, and where I could be useful. And I did the same thing with fire because they've got a co-response unit there, Health One, where you have a case manager and firefighter. And so from day one, I just level set that this is not a political question at all. That I have.
You're basing everything you're doing off the data.
Off the data and off the human.
Was it well received?
It was. And I think people were fascinated by that. And I didn't know what I didn't know. I'm super candid because I do care deeply about the person dying on the sidewalk. That's who I report to. That's how I think. And my assumption is always that's what we all care about. And if we forgot that's what we care about, I'm going to remind you. That's why we're here. It's public service. And I did that. And I think that there was real interest in people inside government watching me respond candidly. And that was well received. And I had tons of momentum once I started talking and presenting and answering questions. I was always quick to say, I don't know the answer. I haven't started yet. Or I don't know because nobody knows. We are building something new, designing something new. It might look like Albuquerque, but I'm also in a different environment. So I'm not going to make a recommendation based off something that is happening thousands of miles away. I don't know yet. And so it has gone well. And I am encouraged by the feedback that I get. I think people are relieved to feel like I don't have to worry about political ideology or any particular
saying
public
the right
opinion.
thing, not saying the right thing. You just say based on what the data says.
Yeah. And based on, I'm so anchored in my mind, my ethical framework is just, it's in my cells at this point. I am an altruist. There's no question. At this point, I've already sort of lived the happy life I wanted to live. I've raised my kids. I feel so grateful for everything I've already experienced. Now I'm in the second act, and I don't feel like I have anything to lose. I want to give back. I want to contribute. And however I can, whatever I have developed that is useful, that's what I have to give. And I'm very comfortable saying what I think is right and letting the chips fall.
You talk about a sense of relief with the people who, used when you were able to share these things out loud.
Yeah.
Does it seem like they felt like, okay, I can get behind this? Like maybe I can't say it myself, but she can. And so,
Yeah, I think it's and some of it is just, we don't know what we don't know. This space is so interdisciplinary. And so I think, again, accidentally, it makes me a good candidate because I understand something about this, something about this, something about this, something about this. You can't look at, again, I talk about fentanyl recovery all the time, recovery from that type of dependency that's so profound. You really couldn't understand it if you don't have a line of sight into what this is doing physically to the body, how this drug manifests in the body. So that's a medical component, a clinical component, the psychosocial stuff. I think in terms of cognition, the brain. And then just the really basic human stuff is what I talk about, that we're not all that different. That I often will use the metaphor, have you ever tried to break a habit? Or lose 10 pounds or drink less or get out of a bad relationship, even if you're the most privileged person in the world, that stuff is hard.
Yeah.
And so you take
patterns are hard to change.
Patterns are hard. And again, that's the nature of the brain, right? That's like neuropathways. We know that. And so I'm trying to remind people, just take that experience, magnify it by 1,000, add a trauma history, and perhaps you never had self-efficacy. You never had a deep sense of worthiness and belonging.
Right.
And then how do you transcend this?
Right.
And I think the simplicity of that, reminding us that, yeah, we certainly have different backgrounds, but I always say the brain is the brain. The brain is the brain. And when it comes to recovery, whether I'm talking about reentry from the carceral system or first step into housing and then I sustain, or first step forward on a jobs path, or, becoming sober and maintaining, there's always this point at which somebody starts to believe that tomorrow can be different, that there can be a different tomorrow. And if that is not in place, there's not going to be sustained recovery. If I feel stable, I feel like I'm doing better, and then I go right back to the circumstances I was in,
there's a high likelihood that you're going to do the same exact thing that you don't want to continue to do.
That's exactly right. And I feel like I'm reminding people of things we know. I remember learning in the 80s, 12-step program, right? Yeah. You can't go back to that bar. You can't have the same friends probably and sustain recovery. So it's interesting that somehow, I don't know if somebody tweeted something at some point. Like, I don't know how we sort of lost our way so far about some of these simple truths.
Right. Seems like very rational, common sense truths.
Totally.
So as a 911 data person, I mean, I would imagine that the entire city of Seattle has an astronomical amount of calls every year. And are you specifically familiar with Housing First buildings, with permanent supportive housing buildings, with DESC, Lehigh, Plymouth, Catholic Community Services?
Yeah.
And are you aware at all? So I've went in, or at least interviewed people from a couple of specific buildings, and I had pulled some data just from police and fire. The police reports, of course, take a little bit longer to get than the fire. But with fire in particular, one of the buildings on Rainier Avenue South, there were over 286 calls in 2023 and 180 something in one of the other buildings in 2023. How much, I mean, there's this idea, right, with Housing First that these buildings are going to help people improve their quality of life and, essentially save taxpayers money and, get the problems off the streets. Do you feel like first responders are called more to these buildings than, say, your average apartment building?
Oh, I know they are. That's the whole basis of my approach is I'm just looking at hotspots. So I'm analyzing 911 data all the time. On the criminal side, and again, I'm very embedded in both police and fire. We are acting as one public safety team. I'm in the police crisis data all the time. They have world-class research and analytics in that department, which complements and supplements what I have in 911. And I can see consistently that half of the top 10 hotspots, calls for service in 911, are going to these 5 locations. So then what do? I go spend time there and try to understand what's happening. It's important to say I just am not wired to assign blame to people. I don't think in those terms. I'm just a systems thinker. I know that the system's always designed to get the results it gets.
Which is why I'm so excited to talk to you, because we're just talking about the system.
Totally. And so when I go, I've talked about the Morrison Project. That's like my emphasis.
That's a big hotspot, I would imagine.
That's right. I dispatched police there 185 times last year. Again, John Ehrenfeld's team at Health One, they went out a lot. You can look at co-response and secondary response units. And I can see there my interest is, 25% of those calls are crisis calls. They're just purely crisis calls. Somebody thinks they have spiders coming through the wall or, all different things that are just human behavior things. And so, in partnership with other people, Barb Biondo's one, she's a crime prevention coordinator, leadership at DESC, that site manager, we're using this to go, okay, what could we change about this environment? If I know the calls escalate after 5 p.m., I presented this to council. Why might that be? Is it because case managers leave?
Right. Your daytime staff is no longer there after 5 p.m.
Yeah.
Right.
And so rather than continuing to triage and wait until somebody is in crisis, what can we do to improve this environment? People have been very collaborative with me and very candid. I think they know that I'm there to help. And one of the things I learned the first time I was there is that people are hungry. There's a high degree of food insecurity. There's not really, it's not easy to get food in that neighborhood to begin with. But I believe there used to be a Fair Start partnership. There used to be things like that. Another thing I learned the first time there was there's not activities. We don't have an activities director. So I've got 190 people with very high acuity diagnoses, lots of trauma past, all co-located. Many are hungry and bored. And so again, this gets pretty simple. That is going to be an environment where you would naturally have what's called collective disturbance, right? Where we're kind of pinging off one another. And if we're around a lot of anger and hostility, I'm likely to react to that, especially if I have a history where I'd be very sensitive to it. I think it's predictable. I don't know. Just as a person, it doesn't make a lot of sense to me to co-locate like that with so much density. I just think it's always going to be very hard to manage. I don't know what the premise ever was. It was cute when I was at Union Gospel Mission this week. I apologize. I'm sorry I haven't been here yet, but I said, I'm not getting 911 calls here. That's why I haven't been here. So congratulations. You're doing a really good job. And they left. But I could see when I was there why. The spirit of the place is different. There are more activities. There's more pro-social behaviors. It could be that there are lower diagnosis folks there. I haven't looked at that.
You're talking about the Mission right down on 2nd Avenue?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. And I was at Mary's place today. Again, that is a fantastic model.
Yeah.
And again, I can see by the data, it's working.
Yeah.
I'm not getting the same calls for service. They have fantastic infrastructure to triage a lot of the things, right? If somebody is going into some sort of space or crisis, I can get you mental health support here on demand, or medical support, or your case managers here, what is going on. Or here's a playroom, we're going to play with your kids while you talk to someone. So that's a totally different model. And in the country, that is the model I've seen that works.
Yeah.
When it's supports come to you on demand and somebody invests long enough to determine what is going on here in your life. Is basically like a skills audit, but also the emotional part and the psychological part. What do I believe about myself? Can I be a good parent? Can I hold down a job? Can I have a different future?
Yeah. What about Rainier Avenue South, so the Estelle building? Are you familiar with that?
I am, but I haven't been to a site visit there.
Oh, yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
Well, I guess that's kind of good. I did pull some public disclosure records on there and saw a significant amount of violence that has happened in that building. Are you noticing at all an increased number in fentanyl deaths and things like that in a lot of the Housing First buildings?
Oh, I'm noticing an increased number of fentanyl deaths everywhere. But yeah, especially I actually just got a note today about, down on 2nd and 3rd, these specific intersections where there have been 6 overdose deaths this week. And so I'm going to look into that. That was from a nonprofit provider. So I'm going to check with fire and police. But I get the SPD emails. I get all of them as well. And I'm in all the crime statistics meetings, basically, just tracking the trends. And also the overdose, the health part. So I know that it's happening. I know that it does not need to be this way. And some of it is the legal side of this. I think Seattle didn't understand the open use ordinance. All that is doing is interrupting somebody's use for a little while, because the premise is I can arrest you. You're not going to be booked unless there's a warrant for something else. You're going to be diverted to services. That is a great model, except I don't have those services. Right. And I'm always really defensive. That is not because diversion doesn't work. That's because, it's not Lisa Dugard's fault that I don't have a fentanyl treatment center, that I could just have the care team drive someone to. I don't have that. And it took me a while to realize that you couldn't go to Harborview. We keep taking people to Harborview. You can't get methadone in Harborview. There's not a through line there. You can get hydrated, basic wound care, and then hopefully a referral to a primary care provider who then it's just nutty to me, evergreen treatment. I support all these providers, but it's like, it's faulty logic to think that somebody's going to go to an appointment every day. Right. I would have a hard time doing that. And I have all the privilege and autonomy and work in the world, and it would be very hard for me to do.
Yeah. Well, and with addiction, it's pretty necessary to arrest the problem long enough for the person to gain clarity so that they can gain access to their agency.
Correct.
So that they can make it to these kind of appointments, if those appointments even become necessary after they've gained that clarity.
Correct.
I am a huge proponent of separation from the destructive path.
Correct.
Because
I love that you have to say because.
Because if it wasn't for incarceration, arrest incarceration, and certain things being illegal, I wouldn't be sitting here today. And I know for a fact that, they're not the human beings that exist in these spaces, they're not others. They're no different than I am.
That's right.
And you,
And me.
as you suggested in the very beginning, because there's really not that much of a degree of difference between most of us.
That's right.
How much money, and I don't know, I'm sure you must know, how much money is being spent with the amount of first responder and police response to these buildings annually?
Yeah, I'm actually working on cost benefit analysis right now. It gets a little bit more tricky even to do the math because we've got consistently mandatory overtime for all these different first responders. What does it cost every time I deploy? Because I want to make the case I know that about half the budget is first response, right? Is public safety provision in this city. So that's a lot of money. We have a $7.8 billion biennial budget. It's a lot of money that we're spending. That's just Seattle, right? And then you've also got a county budget, state. And so it looks to me like we're spending millions and millions of dollars, but we're just prolonging suffering. It would be faster and
based on the
better
approach that we're currently taking.
Yeah, because I just keep dispatching to triage, right? So in one interview, someone said, "Is this a Band-Aid on a bullet hole?" And I said, "Yes." Yeah. Sometimes, kind of, almost literally, it really is. It's inhumane. It would be better to. I do want to act more like we did during COVID, pop up. Like maybe I can't have the ideal facility right now with everybody's en suite and everything, but can I get folks indoors? And stabilize long enough. One of the things that I have loved with some of the media ride-alongs with CARE is that you get to see footage. The truth is people do not want to be fentanyl addicted.
They don't. They don't like the circumstances of their life.
They do not like the circumstances. That is that this drug has overwhelmed and co-opted and preempted every good thing in their life. They didn't like their circumstances before fentanyl hit the scene. That's right.
When I was working in social services, the majority of clients that I was able to serve, which I didn't have autonomy to help them the way that I did because I was functioning under somebody else's directive.
Yeah.
My clients who sometimes were friends that I had known from the past, they didn't like their circumstances then.
Yeah.
But we were limited as to what we could actually offer.
Yeah.
And so,
which
is what you were talking about.
Yeah. I think we need to get comfortable in, especially social services, human services, the clinical community. Different kinds of people need different kinds of treatment and recovery. I have talked to, people who are in recovery will recognize me on the street and come tell me their story right now. And I get emails from all over. If you see my daughter, she's fentanyl addicted, she's homeless, will you do something? I respond to everyone. I have yet in this job, if you ask me to speak, to show up, I have yet to decline. Makes the days kind of long and chaotic, but I just know if I'm that mom out in Spokane and I know that my kid is on, 3rd and Pine, and I know the crime's likely to be committed against her in the state or the way she might be preyed upon, I would write to Amy Smith too and say, if you see her. And that keeps me going, because it is just a dereliction of duty that we ever let it get this bad.
Yeah.
And I see it up on North Aurora. When I'm with community in these community forums, the most meaningful part is creating space for people's disappointment to just be able to acknowledge that and say, I know. And now what? Because we can't spend too much time looking back at, all of that. And now what do we do? Because we have, when you look at Washington and Oregon, the rates of overdose exponentially worse, even than in California. And so we can look at the scoreboard and know, well-intentioned, we got it wrong.
Yeah.
We got it wrong.
Just say we got it wrong.
Yep.
And let's turn it around.
Yep. Now together.
And honestly, exactly. Because honestly, we changed policy like that in this state a couple years ago.
Yeah.
And we've seen it spiral.
Yeah.
We can change it back just as fast.
That's right. Yeah.
And we can create space where people can actually get their lives together.
Yeah. Yeah, that's right. I think that sometimes what you said about, becoming clean after arrest, most people, that is the story. I mean, most people, I've talked to 2 people this week, both who said, I was arrested at least 40 times before. But the cool part of those stories for me is it's not that they were arrested being punished. It's that an officer was taking interest, and coming back and coming back and coming back and saying, you're better than this. Your wife is calling me. Like, come on. I'm not going to arrest you today. Can I take you somewhere else to get help? I think there is a lot of humanity, and I haven't heard anywhere that somebody sees somebody fentanyl dependent and thinks that's a criminal. I have not heard that. And so I think people my age and older, we remember the 80s. We remember that war on drugs. That was completely different.
Yeah, I don't think that we can, and they're
totally different.
They're consistently put into the same category together. What's happening now and what was happening then, they're totally different things.
Yeah.
And I want to really highlight this idea of punishment, because I hear that a lot.
Yeah.
When I'm on drugs, I commit crimes.
Yeah.
If I'm committing crimes, it is an officer's duty to keep the community safe from me.
Yeah.
And so is that punishment? Well, it's no different. If one of your kids came and stole from your purse and decided that they were going to be a drug addict, would you let them bring 5 of their crackhead friends into your house and continue to take from you?
Yeah.
Or would you give them some sort of consequence, right?
Yeah. No, that's right. And I think, again, the carceral system should always have been rehabilitative. So that's one of the things I think we're collectively reacting to. It should be, I always say, you should be better off, no matter what. If there's sort of public sector intervention, it should be for your good.
Right. It should be to teach us how to fish. Right. I absolutely agree with you 100%. And I try to give our system grace. If they knew better, they'd do better. If you haven't been to hell, you probably don't know how to navigate your way out of it.
Yeah.
I find it strange but interesting that I'll find these little gems, these little unicorns located in society where they sort of have some awareness because they've internalized their own personal experiences and recognized their capabilities and their ability to change.
Yeah.
And really it's a framework more than it is sort of the details on the framework. For example, like, making your decision to go back to school and parent 4 teenagers as a single mom.
Yeah.
And, being able to look at the challenges that you've experienced and knowing how that same framework can be then transitioned onto, say, for example, drug addiction, right? Because I view those things as very similar. A lot of people don't know. So our system only knew what it knew and only knows what it knows. And now we know a lot more than we used to. Yeah. And so, for those who aren't aware, you bring in lived experience and you redevelop the tool.
Yeah,
right? We redevelop the tool, which is what I'm working on in Washington State prisons, because our carceral settings are exactly that. They're a tool.
Yeah.
And right now we're throwing the baby out with the bathwater.
That's right.
So
that's right. And I think we do need, for a lot of people, just again, outside of substance use disorder, you've got mental health crisis or chronic depression, something's going on. Some people do need inpatient treatment long enough to really stabilize, to have support, for somebody to really observe how is this going. And Washington State is so restrictive and prohibitive in that way. And so I know that there are a lot of leaders working on that as well, recognizing it might be a small portion of the population, but it is a very small portion of the population right now shooting up the city. Right. Honestly.
Yeah, it is. No, it's very tiny.
Yeah.
And I remember looking a number of years ago, I want to say it was at least 2019, and there were like roughly 12 to 13,000 documented or, recorded addicts that were in the area. That's not a lot of people. Yeah. So, and I'm pretty sure there's a lot more than that, but that was sort of the general idea.
Yeah.
And to say that small of an amount of people in a city so large that we're driving such a strong narrative.
Yeah.
But look how much damage it's creating, right? We've got to do something different.
That's right. And I think a lot about the generational harm. I talk about I think it was 5,700 spent casings that were recovered last year, 5,700 in the city, over 2 million pills recovered, right?
Yeah.
So when you
think
only
about
what's recovered, that's right. But I talk a lot about how it's not just the homicide. Okay, 73 homicides, that's horrifying. Yeah. But kids are growing up just listening to gunshots. It is normalized. For me, it's amazing how quickly I've become desensitized to these statistics.
Yeah.
And again, have to put myself on the front lines and keep myself there with, no, this is the parent of, and this is what it feels like. Do not let this be normal. I think when I first got back, it's always fun, the questions I got asked, because that's when I started to realize what wasn't going well based on what I was being asked. And quickly, people started to say, what do you think about smoking fentanyl in public? And I didn't know that was a thing. Again, it wasn't a thing where I had just moved from. And I said, I assumed we just didn't have officers, that was why. And I said, well, in my lifetime, it's never been legal to smoke a cigarette anywhere. I was like, this is the most lethal drug we have ever been aware of. It will kill you. No, I can't imagine that that's appropriate. And I remember that woman was like, yeah, but I got asked several times. I think it's so funny that we seem to have debated whether or not you could secondhand inhale the smoke. That's not the point, Ginny. I mean, that is not the point. The point is you should not make normal a behavior you do not want children to grow up to do.
Right.
I mean, we have known that forever, that if I grow up in a household with parents who smoke 2 packs a day, that's a thing people do. That's normal. And I am likely to do that same behavior. We have bias toward the familiar, bias toward what we know. So that's why it should not have been a thing. And also, it is a different drug. I know it will kill you. Yeah. I know it will. I know I've got a short runway. And so the intellectual, the ethical inconsistency to me is really interesting in 911 when I'm thinking about call prioritization. Priority 1 is threat to life. So I've been working with police to get more crisp about this framework, because we were sending lights and sirens to things that were premised on what if the very worst case scenario happened, but it was unlikely to. So trying to get very clear, like, no, this is what an urgent threat to life looks like. This is what this happened in, the last 5 minutes. But I think about how listening to radio, coming into work, somebody's threatening to jump. Priority 1, go get that person, give them a chance. We're not going to let them self-determine, do they jump, do they not? It's up to you. I don't treat it that way. It's very clear. And yet somebody who has, I know, overdosed 15 times in the last month, I'm not going to send priority 1 and bring you indoors and get you help. Even though I know it is a slow, painful death, and you will die if this is not interrupted. I have not heard this story yet. There might be one. Contact me if there's a story, but I have not heard of somebody deep into fentanyl dependency who changed their mind, found treatment, and got clean. I just haven't heard it yet. And so it makes me feel like it's an outlier if that is a person.
I have one friend.
Okay.
I have one.
Good. Let me talk to your friend.
Actually, okay, wait a minute. I know 2 people.
Okay.
Which this is the thing, because so many people are saying people don't get clean from it. I actually do have a friend. His name is Frankie Marino, and he did stop and he did go to treatment. He's on a taper Suboxone program right now. But there's another guy, and he lives in Olympia, because I'm supposed to take him to lunch soon.
I'll go.
Because he was watching. Okay, I would love that, because he was watching our channel.
Yeah.
And he said that watching our channel encouraged him to get clean, and he was on fentanyl.
Look at you.
I'll set that lunch up.
Yeah, it was interesting. And when Jonathan Cho did the ride along, I was so gratified because somebody flagged down the care team to provide Narcan. But it was, again, a moment I haven't seen where this young man, then you see Brooke, my responder, talking to him, doing kind of motivational interviewing, saying, would you like me to call detox? I can call it. Yeah. And he says, I don't know. They go back and forth. And then she says, it's up to you, but I can call. Yeah. And he says, do it. And I was like, okay. But the thing is, we have got to figure out that moment when there is that cogent moment. How do you get treatment on demand? And then post detox, how is there a sure path where this person can sustain that gain and that win? And Brooke did a nice job talking about how these are his other goals. Wants to reconnect with his family, wants to go back to work. And fentanyl, again, it really keeps me up at night because I look at the age of folks who are dying from this drug, and that kills me too. That I understood that heroin, this is a tough addiction, but you can live with it for 30 years. Mm-hmm. People do hold down jobs and they maintain some parts of life. And so I feel real urgency around this. And
it's killing everyone.
Yeah,
and it's killing a lot of kids.
Yeah, that's right.
It's killing a lot of kids.
That's right.
Well, I think that's why there has to be a mandatory separation. There has to be a mandatory separation.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It was interesting, to remember that was something that President Biden had talked about on the campaign trail. That I do think it's something that most people understand if they're listening to the medical community. But again, we're conflating things, that we know that people are more likely to be successful in recovery if they choose to go into it. But that is supposing that we have a runway, that we have time to talk to someone. I feel the same way about getting folks indoors, that yes, it's ideal if I can sort of talk you into it and figure out the right fit and get you indoors. And I also know, like, people are being murdered on the streets in this city. If I am living unhoused, there is a higher likelihood that something is going to happen to me, especially for these women, the women that I'm meeting with. And so
there's a lot of perpetration and traumatizing of women out on the streets, for sure.
That's right. And I try to imagine myself always, okay, if I'm in this circumstance, I know if I sat on the sidewalk and was crying, people would stop and ask if they could help me. That is the affordance and privilege of my life. I can't imagine what the impact would be to be walked by like I'm inanimate, like I'm a thing and not a person. And if that was my experience day over day, month over month, year over year, what does that do to a person? And then how much deeper is that despair, is the sorrow, and how much steeper the climb up out of it? It was fun to talk to. I was talking to Dominique at Mary's place this morning about prevention. How do we intervene at the first sign of trouble so that families don't experience homelessness? Right? But we don't tend to like to pay for prevention. We never have in this country.
Yeah, but the cleanup afterwards is far more expensive.
Yeah,
isn't it?
And inhumane.
Yeah, very inhumane. I mean, what do you think? What do you think the route out is?
I think we need to we need to publicly declare that we are all in alignment, that the homelessness crisis is a crisis, and that the best path forward is to talk to an individual, understand their unique needs, and then together craft a path forward, right? That it's really not that complicated. We need good case management. I know people on the front lines of service, they know there's a need for everyone. There is a need for what Andrea is doing. There's a need for what CoLead does. There's a need for what Reach is doing. There is consensus. Sometimes, and I've seen this throughout my career too, and I have been in this space before, even going out with outreach teams and really clinical teams where I'm the person that they want to talk to for whatever reason. Safe mom energy seems like not an official person, seems like a safe person. Okay. On my care team, it's interesting. One of the responders has lived experience and also has, letters and degrees. But I think it's that lived experience component that makes her very useful and the only person who could guide a person indoors sometimes or into treatment. And so there's all different types of sort of interventionists who can be useful. So stop debating it. And I feel the same way about housing. It looks to me like we can see in 911 what isn't going very well, what models aren't working very well for people to heal. And then all around the country, we see models that do work well. Mm-hmm. And have you ever seen models shift, like the permanent supportive housing programs, specifically here in Seattle? Have you seen any shifts in any of them where they've actually started to call for resources less, if that question makes sense at all? I would have to look back specifically at that model and see if I can see examples. The examples I'm more personally familiar with are like Mary's Place, mm-hmm. where, again, we started to see, there's this new need. Today, we were talking about the refugee immigrant population. That is a different set of needs, right? There's a whole pile of legal implications and complications that are more difficult. There are a lot of nonprofits around the country who started to realize, there's one I love in Louisville, Kentucky. If I send you down the street to Dress for Success, you're not going to make that appointment. It's better to bring this service to you during this first more vulnerable 6 months while we are helping you to re-enter, to skill up, to have confidence, to understand how to keep an appointment, mm-hmm. things like that. So my belief is that, even the NIMBYism I hear a lot about, I personally haven't seen that in communities. I think people recently, since coming back to Seattle, I think people understand, it's just the trauma and pain and suffering it's all over all of our neighborhoods now. And that's not good. And so I think that most neighborhoods are more clear. No, we're happy to cite a community, but it needs to be safe and healthy and, not problematic, not preyed upon by dealers.
And that's not what we see in these housing first buildings.
Yeah. I mean, I know that people are really vulnerable. I know that they are. And I know that we don't have enough law enforcement or sort of security provision that we could maintain safety. So it's just my own personal opinion. I think it's probably better to have small, I like the tiny house villages a lot. I think it's bizarre that we think because somebody overdosed on 3rd and Pine, they need to recover downtown Seattle. No, a lot of people want to go back to, I grew up in Cle Elum, or if it were me, I have property in Kentucky. If I went through a horrific experience and needed to recover, I would do better in the country, in my garden, with my friends, So again, all different people are different.
Not in the same.
But yeah, we're being so prescriptive. It's just like people have congregated downtown, especially if they're reliant on dealers. And so then we're trying to help them into recovery in the same space. And I'm not sure about that.
Well, and often within these apartment buildings, they're right there.
They're right there.
They live right there inside.
They're right there. Yeah. Yeah.
Even if we do send them out for all of these supportive helps, treatment, what have you, we're putting them right back in the same environment.
That's right. That's right. Well, I talk often about the Civic Hotel. It had such an impact on me, my first visit there, because it's in my neighborhood. It's right near where I work, where I live. I've walked past it 100 times at least. I thought it was a little boutique hotel. I had no idea that was a first step indoors. Again, 6 to 9 months, we're going to figure out what is your next step. What should permanent housing look like, or supportive housing? Clean, well-maintained, appropriate case management. But again, usually about 38 residents, right? And so it's
smaller environment.
Yeah, it's a smaller environment. And so you have people able to just sort of mingle into a healthy, functioning community, rather than really burdening one neighborhood with
190 people and 2 staff at the front desk who don't really know how to manage that specific population or the multitude of populations within the building.
Yeah, that's right. It's funny. We know in education policy that you've got to maintain a balance, that if I get to a point where my class is 2/3 English language learners, all different languages, that is going to impede progress, right, on the whole. And same thing, it was not a good design to say, special needs, learning differences, you're all over here. That's not good. We want communities, and it's good to have diverse abilities and perspectives and identities all in the same classroom, but you've got to maintain some balance, right? Otherwise, it's impossible to manage. And I'm always defensive of, we've never paid social workers. The whole nonprofit funding structure is chaos. And I really, frankly, hope at the end of my career, I'm just driving IRS reform, because the overhead myth is a huge problem. If I can't ever really scale, if I can't invest in, staff who are compensated and can maintain a decent lifestyle and not themselves be impoverished.
Right. Because most staff that work, especially on the firing lines in these nonprofits, are one paycheck away from being homeless themselves.
Totally. Yeah. Totally. It was one of my proud moments last year to get the new first responder status for the care team responders, and to insist, no, I'm not paying them at this level. I'm paying them like police and fire. I am paying them like that. This is crisis work. It is hard. They also require credentials coming into it, at least the first unit. I don't know that it will always stay that way. But it was a proud moment to feel like in my career working around, again, I was in administration and philanthropy, so I did get well paid. I was tied to money, right? I was one of the few people working with social workers and clinicians with 10 times my aptitude and talent and skill who would make half as much. And so it is personally meaningful to say, nope, these people are paid well. This might be the first social work job that is paid well from jump. And then to put pressure on, I was advocating for folks in cahoots, still starting at $18 an hour. That is not okay. That is not okay. And if we can just invest appropriately, we will see dramatic change, actually. Yeah. We need to pay those professionals.
For sure. When you pay people what they're worth, then it makes them want to do a better job.
Yeah.
It gives them the capability of not having to be stressed out constantly. And, and then you have a different kind of interactions with the people that you serve.
Right. Yeah, I got to see in foster care, and I became a dependency court CASA, that every time case management is disrupted, there's loss. You've got a kid who already has all this abandonment and starts to attach to someone, and it's just another person. And they don't understand classification and compensation. They just know their person left, just like every other person. And the same thing happens with adults, of course. I get to see that I'm in these sort of high utilizer group meetings, and several times in year one, I'd say, what happened? We were doing so well. Case manager left, and I don't blame the case manager. We shouldn't have to martyr ourselves for the work of saving lives.
Yeah, I agree with you 100%.
Yeah.
Thank you. I appreciate your unique experience, especially thinking about the children. And that's what a lot of people don't think about. They don't think about the children that are affected by the adults that we're serving in a lot of these environments today. And so I'm glad that you came up the other way through it with the children first. I think it gave you a much more holistic perspective on everything that you're doing right now. So thank you for your service.
Oh, it is a joy and an honor. And the good news is every day someone like you is put in my path, and it starts to feel like, oh, we're going to drive some change.
That's how I feel like that. I feel like that too.
Yeah.
Sometimes the change to me feels glacial.
Yeah.
However, I'm feeling some synchronicity in this space right now.
Term.
So
Yeah. And you're another example. I talk a lot about this, that yes, there's PTSD and there's trauma and all of this, but there's also post-traumatic growth. And I see that all the time. If you can get to a place of recovery, I mean, people like you become the superheroes in the conversation. And
we're
it
the
has been throughout
experts,
history.
right?
Yeah, but also you must become attached to the heroic strain in your own life. You know where you've come from.
Yes.
And you know what's possible. And that makes you a force.
And, and I think, and thank you for that. It took me a little bit. It was my second year on UW campus before I recognized the value of my lived experience. I recognized the power in it and the time that we're in right now. And it all happened in the midst of the George Floyd and COVID and all of that. And I was like, oh, wait a minute. Yeah. They don't actually know what they're talking about. Yeah. But I do. Yeah. And wow. It just really made me own my story. And the interesting, fun part of it for me over the last few years has been the alignment between me and folks that have also had similar life experiences in law enforcement and things like that, because we're very much aligned at how these things can be solved by just transitioning and transforming and replacing a few different key components here, right? Yeah. And the same with you. The common sense, it blows me away sometimes that we're all missing what seems to be painted all over the wall.
I know. I made the joke the other day. I was like, I have yet to say anything smart. Like,
I know.
That's such logic. I probably have some thoughts that are smart, but we're not even getting anywhere near that. It's just basic. Yeah. It's funny how accountability, of course we know this.
Right. Super simple.
Yeah. Right. Yeah. Incentives, deterrence. It's fun to talk about juvenile justice. I get asked about that because people know that I know a little bit more about the young mind. And someone said in a forum, well, but Amy, the brain's not developed. Basically, how can you hold a child to account? And I said, well, right. So you need stronger deterrence and more clear incentives, because the brain is not developed. I said, have you met a 3-year-old? The name of the game is not to make it completely ambiguous what the consequence of your actions are. And so, I love restorative practice. I understand all of that. But what that means is you connect someone swiftly and early and deeply to the consequence, to the human cost, and the cost to your own life quickly. So that does not mean no accountability.
Right. That's the deterrent. And I was just having a conversation with somebody yesterday where we were discussing, well, what we've done is we've taken away that early interruption. Yeah. And now we're letting it stand so long that it's so extreme by the time something happens that it warrants a massive consequence.
That's right.
A real punishment.
That's right.
Right? When we could have intervened early on. Yeah. And we see it a lot right now. Look at all these kids, the Kia boys. Yep. All of the kids that, well, why? Why is this happening? Well, because they know that nobody's coming.
They do.
They know that no facilities are present to hold them.
Yeah.
And what's going to happen, and it actually pains my heart, because what's going to happen is these kids are going to end up being charged as adults and being completely traumatized in the adult system.
That's
because we took away the ability to intervene early.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah. That is something that I'm starting to talk about more because I think people don't understand.
Every time I open my phone, there's another Como news splash from YouTube that shows me another video with kids. Kids with
Teens,
guns, cars.
Yeah, that's right. And there's so much frustration in parent and educational communities because they know how vulnerable their schools are and their kids are, that we have. Again, I talk a lot about the sentencing guidelines, that you have to be caught in possession of a firearm the 5th time before sentencing guidelines suggest we really act. That is absolute. I couldn't actually believe it. I'm still astonished by I do not know what that logic is. I don't know what it is. And it's not even that 5 different crimes. It has to actually be that same caught in possession of. It has to be that 5 times.
The same specific crime. Yeah, that's wild. I feel like maybe my husband told me, I don't remember. I don't think it's Washington State. There's another state that is threatening to charge the parents when children, I don't know if it's when they commit crimes or when they act in a specific way. But I think that we've shifted so much as a society, and I don't remember if it's in Washington or not, but I don't think that's just in the state of Washington, because what we do in the state with the schools, my daughter, when she was in middle school, well, she was taught that she has consent in her own life with her health or mental health and things like that at the age of 13. And so that's the only place that she could have learned it, because she refused to do family counseling with me. She said, I don't have to.
Oh,
because
wow.
I
Really?
know
Yeah.
that they have to tell you everything. So our schools are teaching this to our kids.
Yeah.
So, we don't have any kind of authority in the lives of our kids, but we are financially and legally responsible.
Yeah.
And so,
Again, really inconsistent.
yeah,
thinking.
we're teaching our kids this.
Yeah.
And so,
Yeah.
I feel like this system plays a huge part in the shift in everything. And I don't know.
Yeah.
I want things to come together a little more rationally, so that we can start to prevent a lot of what it is that we're seeing. Anyway.
Well, I think these conversations help. I feel like if we had 1,000 people here around us, people would just be nodding.
Saying, yeah.
I've seen that. I understand that. That makes sense. And I get asked sometimes why, basically, how did we get here? What happened? And I do think a lot. And I think what happened was, as we got more sophisticated, in the 90s, like the ACEs study, we started to understand trauma. We started to understand statistically. I always use the example of like the child predator was likely a victim as a child, statistically. And so we start to have more compassion for the victimization of this person. But the response to that isn't no safety for community and no accountability. I think I mentioned to you when we talked, like the IF project. I love that model because there's something so pure and simple about what were you dealt? What were the factors in your life where you came into the world and this was likely to happen? I was raised by someone heroin dependent. I was born into a family where this, and so to have compassion for your young self, to forgive that, make peace with it. But then what did I contribute? Right. What did I know? What is my part? Or even if I feel like I contributed very little, where do I go from here?
Right.
And
I talk to my youngest child a lot, because her father is an active fentanyl user today, and I'm obviously a recovering drug addict. And so when she ponders making specific decisions that will very likely lead her in a direction similar to my life or her dad's, I get the opportunity to ask her, and this is what I talk to a lot of young people about when I go into high schools and things like that and speak. Are the decisions that you're making today contributing to the life that you want to have? And what is the life that you want to have? Because if we're not intentional about what we're doing, there's a high likelihood that we'll end up somewhere that we never planned, because we're just kind of flying by the wind.
Well, and again, psychologically, this is survival related. We gravitate toward what we know.
Right.
We gravitate toward what's
familiarity. And it's unconscious.
It is.
It's unconscious. We're attracted to things that are on a similar wavelength, things that are familiar to us, often from our foundational period.
That's right. If you've been around a lot of hostility, you will be attracted to it.
Yes.
Even if you front of mind. You don't.
You're
think
like,
that.
no way.
Yeah.
It is because it's familiar.
Yeah.
And it translates as a feeling.
Yeah.
More than anything cognitive.
Yeah. That's right. That's right.
I've studied myself quite deeply
clearly.
because of this.
Clearly.
So yeah.
But that's sort of the fun of it, is to become the authority on yourself, on your own wiring. When I was at Moyer Foundation, which is now called Eluna, we were trying to intervene with kids who had addiction in the home. At the time, age of first use was 13, so we started providing free interventions, kind of counseling and camps at the age of 11. And it was really powerful to observe this, the basic ideas. I didn't cause this. Let's get really clear. Right. I did not cause it, because every kid thinks whatever's going wrong in the household is their fault. No matter the divorce is my fault.
It doesn't matter how old you are. I was like 6 when I took on the responsibility for things that a 6-year-old could have never been responsible for.
We all do it. Yeah. I didn't cause it, and then I can't cure it.
Yeah.
I can't cure it. Just alleviate that burden. But this is what I control.
Right.
And gosh, I loved watching that, because I thought I love the science, like the scientific premise that if this is first use, get out ahead of it. Because I didn't know these things until I was well into adulthood. I think for most of us, that's how it is. You're not availed of that information. So things like that I want to see in schools.
Yeah. Right. We need to teach children how to navigate their emotional and their mental life in a way that helps them to take control of their...
To be proactive.
Absolutely. Their forward conduct. Yeah. Absolutely.
Yeah. There's some youth nonprofits I'm around. It's always stunning to... one is Key to Change. I just love. So that I'm a musician. This is, violin lessons and viola lessons for kids who wouldn't otherwise have access. Just amazing, some of the youth I've met, where I learn a little bit about their story, and I think, some of the worst backstory I've ever heard, and not an ounce of victimhood in them. It's like, I can't believe how lucky I am. I have a bright future. I met this young woman who applied herself for a scholarship to go to Lakeside when she was 13. I was like, how did you even know what Lakeside was? A teacher told her. This woman will be a force in the world, understood her circumstances, again, raised by grandma. It's kind of a funny story, because grandma got the admission letter and was like, what's this? And supports her. And but that's what kids need to understand, that regardless of the hand that you are dealt, there is a way.
You can deal your own hand, right? And it's all in the messaging. That's what I teach guys in prison that are grown up. And the interesting thing, and you had made a comment about you're used to dealing with young minds, and I don't remember exactly how you said it, but the adults that I work with inside of prison, they're still young. They're young minds, right? And they're just in these grown-up bodies. And they have all the same fears and insecurities and things like that. And so, and really that's exactly what I work on. I work on helping them to inspect and dissect their messaging, and then to rebuild that messaging based on what it is that they want to see themselves be able to achieve or accomplish. So
you have to bring me with you.
Yeah. Oh, I would love to.
You have to.
Oh, I would love to.
I live for this stuff.
Yeah. Next time I do a big thing, I'll take a bunch of folks into the prison. I think that people in there would love it for sure. So
Okay, we're best friends for Amy.
Yeah.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.